Howdy, howdy. It's been a while. It's been a while on this channel, guys. Been a long, long while on this channel. I think the last time I updated was about May. So I think it's long overdue for a new series of videos. Just an update. A lot's been going on in the past, 8-9 months. So I haven't really had a chance to update. But spiritual progression is coming along pretty nicely, and today I have a interesting video for you. It deals with the concepts of psychopathy, perversion, and PDFs, if you catch my drift. I'm going to be analyzing this through my own experiences, both internally and externally, and giving some analysis through a spiritual lens. Hopefully this helps some people. If you're dealing with these issues, or if you're know somebody who's dealing with these issues. This is a non-judgmental space, so let's get right into it. All right. Got my little whiteboard here. I don't know how well you can see it, but let me move the phone out a little bit. All right. On my end, it's a little flip, but I know it'll flip back around when I upload the video. Anyway, title: Psychopathy, Perversion, and PDFs analysis. Well, first we're gonna talk about psychopathy. All right. Well, first we need to get a overview of what psychopathy is. Psychopathy, and I'm not gonna use the clinical terminology for this or the clinical checklist, but this is more through a personal experience of what I've come to understand psychopathy is. Okay, well, psychopathy is how do I put this and articulate this? Psychopathy is it's a detachment from emotions. It's also a extreme form of nihilism, as in nothing matters aside from what I want. Somewhat like narcissism, but it takes it a step further. Okay, some common traits of psychopathy, to drill this down further, include a lack of empathy, service to self, extreme nihilism, not just your average everyday nihilism of nothing matters. This is an extreme version of nihilism. I don't want to belong, but we'll get to that. Destructive tendencies, selfishness, which is slightly different to service to self. Selfishness in a more physical, more practical matter. Zero-sum mentality, zero-sum game, entitlement, and psychopathy can be either malignant, benign, or acquired. And psychopathy in and of itself has a connection to the impulse known as Soroth. Soroth is the cosmic impulse identified by Rudolf Steiner as the destructive annihilation aspect of creation, whereas the Christ consciousness, unity consciousness, would be unity with everything. Soroth would be the opposite of that, destruction of everything, not belonging. But in my experience, I have dealt with psychopathic tendencies. I'm not afraid to say that. I still deal with these tendencies. In fact, it's a big tug of war internally between the psychopathic tendencies and the more enlightened Christ-like tendencies. I'd like to say that I am both a psychopath and a saint at the same time, and these modes bounce back and forth. Okay, for me, how psychopathy manifests is a deep sense of not wanting to belong. I've always had this internalized struggle of not wanting to be seen, and over time that gradually morphed to I don't want to be here at all. But it's not so much like a suicidal tendency. It's more of a none of this matters. It just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what I do, it doesn't matter what I say. At the end of the day, who gives a shit? And this typically manifests on social media. If you guys have Facebook, you will know the posts I'm talking about, the rage bait posts. I'm usually, unfortunately, lured into those posts, and I've said some pretty nasty things. And a lot of it deals with a lot of the ists, or the phobias, as we call it in popular culture, geared towards that. And there's a deep internal disillusionment with certain aspects of other people, and a lot of these aspects are actually mirrored within. Yeah, but at its worst points, it can manifest as a desire to destroy everything, a genocidal mindset, for example, serial killer mindset. I've dealt with that various times after a deep, dark depression, and not working on myself, and that sits and that stirs and that compresses, and it drives the negative energy down into the subconscious, and it sits there and it rises back up through these behaviors. Like I said, it's kind of like nihilism, but it's not fully nihilism. Excuse me, it's like narcissism, but it's not fully narcissism. Narcissism is normally comes from a deep-rooted place of insecurity, or psychopaths don't have that deep insecurity. It's just me, without the deep self introspection that most narcissists have. The only problem with narcissists is they have that deep insecurity, but they project onto other people. Whereas psychopathy, it's a projection, but it's not a projection of that inner conflict. It's a projection of one's inner selfishness, for lack of a better term. So let's get into these types of psychopathy. The first one that I've identified is the malignant psychopathy. Malignant psychopathy, like I've alluded to previously, it deals with like things like genocidal behavior, actions, serial killers, sexual assault, abuse, the wanton infliction of trauma onto other people. It's the deepest, darkest aspects of society. There's things that we don't want to explore, that we don't want to examine within ourselves or in society at large, so we kind of push it back to the side. And we usually put a stigma on it, and like we don't want to talk about it. But psychopathy, it's innate within all of us to some extent. All types of psychopathy. It's to varying degrees, but we all have that inner pull towards destruction, towards annihilation. This can be light, like I want to get rid of a certain habit, or it could go all the way, like I said, to the malignant side, where I want to get rid of a certain person. Now, there's also what we call benign psychopathy. Benign psychopaths are not as antisocial. It's they're likely not to commit any crimes, especially those that violate somebody's free will. However, they're still psychopaths in that there's a lack of emotion, a lack of empathy, a lack of connection, a lack of understanding with others. And it's usually a my way versus the highway thing to a very extreme extent. In other words, the benign psychopath doesn't really care about anybody but themselves. And like I said, this is the most common that we all tend to deal with. And then there's the acquired psychopathy, which can either be malignant or benign. And it's usually this type of psychopathy is brought on by trauma. And that can be a series of emotional traumas, mental traumas, or it can be physical trauma to the head. There are cases of people displaying psychopathic tendencies after severe head injury, for example. And that's more to do with the brain than it does to do with the internal metaphysical flows. But I would also say this: psychopathy is a state of consciousness, not a mental aberration. And what do I mean by that? Psychopaths is, while the mindset is not necessarily positive or normal, it's not the result of some type of delusion normally, or some type of psychosis. Now, some people say that psychopathy is a type of psychosis because it denies the greater aspects of reality, which is unitary, but it's not like a mental illness in the strict sense of it's like schizophrenia or something like that, which I'll get to in another video, because a lot of mental illness is simply psychic phenomena, but we'll leave that for another video. But psychopathy is it's a mental state. Like I said, it's a mental state, the state of consciousness. And when I say psychopaths or psychopathy, very few people are only psychopaths, meaning that they only have that mindset. And most of us, it's blended with the other impulses, the Christ impulse, or the unity impulse, Luciferian impulse, harmonic impulse, or other impulses. It's usually that one part of the psyche, not the entire psyche. And some people, it takes up majority of the psyche, if not the entire psyche. But those are the more extreme, malignant examples. But what I want to say is that if you're dealing with this inner psychopathy, it's really not your fault, and you're not a bad person, and there's really nothing wrong with you. And what do I mean by that? Well, society puts all these expectations on how we should act or should behave, and a lot of it is for a greater good, for a greater safety, for a greater flow. But with that being said, we can't deny how someone perceives the world. For me, my bouts of psychopathy were really brought on by trauma. A lot of trauma, especially in interpersonal relationships. Although I think that was more the straw breaking the camel's back, as there was a lot of environmental challenges as a child, imprisonment of one of my parents, my father, death of my grandmother at a very young age, head injury, poverty, foreclosures, evictions, depression. They kind of all culminated in allowed my consciousness to suppress itself. And that part of my consciousness basically bifurcated from the rest and became its own separate entity, but still me. And it frequently does battle with the other side, the more enlightened, Christ-like side. But if you get down to the root causes of psychopathy, like I said, it's trauma. But it's usually trauma that makes an individual feel like they just don't belong. And granted, a lot of people have that, and it's not indicative of psychopathy, but it's like these repetitive blows to the psyche. That's what causes psychopathy. The psychopath is not at fault for being so self-centered. It is normally, like I said, the result of some type of trauma in the case of acquired psychopathy, but some people can also be born with psychopathic tendencies. And these people need to be given grace. They need to be given grace. Why? Because if you understand the totality of creation, you have to understand that for there to be creation, there must also be destruction. For there to be unity, there must be the absence of unity or disunity, and the most extreme form. Psychopaths, how do I put this? Psychopaths are broken. They're very broken. And those that are born with it, a lot of that comes from past lives, a lot of past life trauma, and then it gets augmented by traumas in this life, typically. Although in some instances, they're just born psychopathic. Now, some of this is also due to soul contract or pre-birth agreements, where this person will play out a certain role for the development and the contrast of others. Psychopathy is also very useful as it does provide the absolute contrast of pure unity. Without understanding the impulse to destroy or to annihilate, you cannot fully understand the impulse to create or to unify or to love or to hope or what have you. So in other words, psychopaths are a critical part of our ecosystem. Now, if you're dealing with psychopathy, what do? Well, the first things first is that you give yourself some grace. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be the result of trauma. It's going to be the result of trauma. And if you want to integrate these psychopathic tendencies, the most important thing is to find the root cause of that trauma. Observe the trauma and then find the root cause of that trauma. And if there are multiple traumas, well, I would suggest gradually going back through each and seeing the progression of how your mental state got to the place it was. Now, if you were born with these tendencies, I would go more into examining your own behaviors and seeing what makes you tick and why you feel the need to not belong, why you feel the need to not show any understanding or empathy, why there is no empathy, and if this bothers you, how to fix it. Well, biggest thing here is integration. You have to integrate it. You have to understand it. You have to understand why you do it. What's the root cause of it? And moreover, how it affects both your life and your environment, how that's projected out. Now, psychopathy, if you're going through spiritual awakening and you have the psychopathic tendencies, there is a pretty good reason for that, on top of the trauma and the being born into it, past life trauma. A lot of it's integration. Like I said, it's integration, but not just on an individual level, on a global level. You have a lot of spiritualists purely focused on love and light, and those that are interested in the darker aspects of reality, the more quote unquote evil, they don't go that deep into things like psychopathy or perversion or PDFs. They don't. It's kind of pushed to the side. It's never mentioned, and if it is mentioned, it's usually given a stigma. Perhaps not as bad as it would be in general society, but it's generally not touched. But, dear friend, if you are dealing with this type of mental state, this type of consciousness state, either frequently or infrequently, you have been given a very special role here. Since nobody wants to touch these darker topics, the fact that you either have to deal with these urges and impulses yourself or somebody around you, it's for the pure reason of helping the planet. Destigmatizing it, understanding it, showing compassion to people that do deal with it and that can't integrate it, at least not now. It also demystifies it and allows us to move away from punishing the person and rather helping the person. How can you know heaven if you don't first know hell? The psychopathy is like a bow and arrow. Okay? It's the momentum. The further down you go, the further that arrow gets pulled back. The more you understand and fall into it, the more you have to deal with it, and it gives you contrast, the more it pulls you back. However, as we all know in spirituality, is that you have to hit that low before you can hit that high. And psychopathy is arguably one of the biggest lows, which will, if you can integrate it properly, send you to the highest highs. So pull the arrow back, as all that resistance, as all that inflammation, all that tension. When it can't be pulled back anymore, the arrow goes, and it goes further than it would before. So you go from the lowest of the low to the highest of the high, and well, that's a excellent recipe for a spiritual growth of high magnitude. Because if you're purely focused on love and light, you're not integrating your shadow at all. And if you have psychopathy, well, you have the biggest shadow of them all. And since nobody's dealing with these topics, you were the forerunners in clearing out all of this dark energy. Because we're not going to get to a better place globally or within ourselves if we don't. If we don't, deal with our deepest, darkest shadow aspects. And most people don't. They don't. So perhaps this isn't the best analysis or interpretation of psychopathy, but I will be going into this more in depth, as this is just kind of a introduction to that. But yeah, I guess that pretty much covers it with the psychopathy. So to run down, if you're dealing with these issues, again, give yourself some grace. Find the issue, find the root cause of the issue in this life. If it's not in this lifetime, go back to previous lifetimes, either by examining your own behaviors, examining family history. A lot of times it's tied to that. And additionally, you can also do things like past life regressions or soul retrievals and things like that to help speed that process along. But remember, if you're dealing with this, you're not a bad person. There's nothing wrong with you. This is a natural artifact of creation in the 3D. And for those of you on the spiritual path dealing with this, it is essential that you deal with this if we're ever to move on to what they would call New Earth. Because if you don't deal with these lower level energies, they're just going to fester and they're going to pop up. And they're going to pop up in ways to where it's been so suppressed, it's like when you shake a bottle of soda. You shake it up enough and then you just that cap just a little bit, it's going to shoot out. Or a volcano. There's enough pressure, it's going to erupt, and it's going to erupt in a very bad manner. Very detrimental manner. For example, if you don't deal with the psychopathy, it could turn into a deep hatred for people. If you keep bottling it up, not dealing with it, and saying you're a bad person, or ignoring it, or just trying to not deal with it at all, it's going to build up and it's going to cause issues. Same thing with the other topics that I'm going to talk about, but we'll get to those in a sec. But overall, this has been a general rundown of the psychopathy topic. Like I said, I will be getting more in depth with this in future videos. I will be sharing more of my experience after I write some of it down to articulate it better. And hopefully this section of the video finds you well. If you are dealing with this, or somebody else around you is dealing with this, just remember grace, non-judgment, and self-examination. It's critical in this. Okay? Alright. Now that we've gotten... oh yeah, one more thing on psychopathy. There's also a form of psychopathy that empaths can get from being around other people that have these tendencies. So if you're an empath and all of a sudden you had no trauma, no emotional trauma or whatever, and you start feeling these, impulses, you might be picking up somebody else's energy. Just to point that out. But anyway, we can now move on to the other part of the video, which is a little bit darker. And that deals with perversion and PDFs. Okay? Alright. I'm not going to write on my whiteboard for this to gather my thoughts. This is a kind of a tricky topic. Well, I myself don't deal with these impulses towards minors. I have met people that have, and I've had similar mental episodes that are analogous to the attraction, but it doesn't deal with that specifically. More to do with my own behaviors regarding, it's actually more regarding the psychopathy, as these two kind of go hand in hand. But first we need to get some definitions in order. A pediophile is someone who likes or is attracted to prepubescent children before the teenage years, before puberty. There's also two other classes of this. One, I believe, is known as a hebephile. I believe these individuals are attracted to the early teenage years, so like 13, 14, 15. And then you have I can't remember the correct term for it, but it's the attraction to 16, 17, so forth. Now, all of these have different levels of stigma in society, although they all kind of get lumped in together. But I'm going through each of them and trying to give an analysis of why, its purpose, and what to do about it. Okay. So, first things first, what causes an individual to develop an attraction to a minor? Okay. Well, from personal experience, both with the psychopathy and with other people who I've encountered, including somebody I was romantically interested in at one point, it's almost being trapped in time. And what do I mean by that? Well, a lot of people who are attracted to children, or minors in this instance, they have abuse in their childhoods, or they have some type of trauma in their teenage years that has caused them to retain an attraction that they had during that period and not move forward mentally. What do I mean by that? Well, the first one, the attraction to children themselves, the PDFs. Most of that, like I said, is the result of childhood sexual trauma. This could range from molestation to rape to incest to even witnessing something like that. Although it typically revolves around somebody having actually been a victim themselves. And it's almost like a Stockholm syndrome almost with a PDF explicitly, to where they now almost enjoy the abuse that they had, and somewhere deep down they want to extrapolate that abuse to someone else because it's comfortable, it's known, and it has some type of release factor to it. Now, I will say this, I want to make a distinction. There's a big difference between somebody who has these impulses and somebody who has acted on these impulses. There's a big difference. And you can make that argument for the psychopathy too. But psychopathy, like I said, isn't cut and dry. I'm going to go out and kill somebody. It's a lot more to it. But this, the PDF issue, is a lot more nuanced. Now, let's move on some to the more higher ages that people are attracted to. The hebephile and the... I can't quite remember the thing, but it has hebephile in the name, but it has a prefix before that. A lot of times, this comes from a form of mental stunting, or delayed development of some type due to some type of teenage trauma. Now, this can have all the hallmarks of the childhood abuse, but it can also range to something like bad breakup, for example, or extreme problems with home life. During the teenage years, a rough childhood that leads into a rough adolescence, and the lack of emotional maturity and emotional regulation. What will happen is that when the event happens, or a series of events happen, the trauma kind of, again, shatters the psyche of the individual, and a part of themselves stays at the time period of that trauma. Now, you're going to age, but your mind and your heart are still stuck on the trauma. It's still the same day, the same week, the same month, the same year as the trauma. So, if your trauma was that your girlfriend at 14, 15 years old betrayed you in some major outing or something like that, like she claimed that you raped her, she claimed that you assaulted her or hit her or something, and that caused a lot of blowback on you, that might stunt your growth mentally. So 10 years later, when you're 14, 15, you're still stuck in that, and you're still drawn to that. And it doesn't always have to be specifically related to the relationship. It might just be the general feeling, or the general environment, or the general vibes that you were getting from that time period before said trauma. So your attraction to teenagers in this instance would be a result of you not moving past that time period. And if you were attracted to, obviously, teenagers back then, while you were a teenager, and your mind hasn't moved any, well, by the time you're 25, you're still going to have an attraction to teenagers. Okay? Now, like I said, there are different levels of stigma to this. The hepaphile and especially the older things. It's been generally more accepted throughout history as just more of a natural byproduct of human evolution, as human sexuality, maturity. It's very akin to what you would see in the animal kingdom, so on and so forth. Although the PDF files themselves, they have always had a much stronger stigma attached. A much stronger stigma. And this is due for a variety of reasons, including religious, cultural, political, spiritual in some instances, etc. Now, if you are experiencing, all right, first we'll talk about the older groups. If you're attracted to or if you, somebody you know, is attracted to the older groups. This one requires less grace in the actual PDF file, but it is going to require you to do, well, they're both going to require you to do some soul retrieval, but it's at a different angle than would be the PDF file. Okay, they're both similar but different at the same time, because one is more stigmatized and it's going to require a more careful approach than the other. If you have an attraction to 16, 17-year-olds, for example, there's probably not much wrong with you, honestly. Like I said, Usually that's a byproduct of human evolution. Although if it bothers you and you're worried about acting on said attractions, the best thing to do would be to revisit the past, preferably what you're attracted to, the ages that you were attracted to, because 9 times out of 10, you can trace that back to some type of trauma that occurred during that period, during that age period, yeah. Which you're gonna have to get down and do some serious self-reflection on that. And you're gonna have to help your younger self basically grow up. You need to heal, in other words. Now, if you are attracted to the middle to lower teenage years, 13, 14, 15, the hebephile, it's similar, but you're going to have to do more digging, perhaps even on some self-hypnosis or some type of regression on yourself, to go back to that period, wherever that trauma was in those early teenage years. And you need to kind of sift through it, because during that age we're very hormonal, we're very not all together there yet. So you need to really do some digging and understand why. Was it maybe the best time of your life, and then the next year something bad happened? Did a parent die? Did a lover die? For those a bit older, did a pet die? Were you bullied in school? That's a big one. Or bullied by your parents? Was there abuse by your parents? You really need to drill in on that. And I would recommend some type of therapy. I would recommend some type of therapy in that instance. But again, give yourself some grace. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing to be ashamed about. But if it's crossing a certain line to where it could be detrimental to your security and your freedom, then yeah, that's when you need to really address it. You need to really address it. Now, let's move on to the PDF files themselves. Okay? Now, obviously, this is the most stigmatized of the groups I'm talking about today. And that's because children obviously have a connection to innocence. Whereas the other two have less force against free will of another individual, the PDF file is, there's a big issue with free will here. Because in no way or form can a child consent. But with that being said, there's still some trapping in the past. And like I said, this is usually a result of sexual abuse. 9 times out of 10, if someone is attracted to children and they are abusing children in that instance, they were abused too as a child. And like I said, it's a Stockholm Syndrome thing. And I would actually advise against going to get traditional therapy, because a lot of states, a lot of countries have mandatory reporter laws, which kind of prevent people from coming forward and working through these issues. Now, if you want to go to therapy and specifically open up about any type of trauma that you might have had in early childhood, that's fine. But we haven't gotten to a point in society where it's not so stigmatized, it's not destigmatized yet, to the point where people can be more open with it and deal with it. It's very much suppressed. Like psychopathy, I would say it's even more suppressed than that. Sorry, guys, had to get a cigarette. But how do you deal with this if therapy isn't necessarily an option? This is going to require the most self-love. It's going to require the most self-grace, and it's going to require the most effort to deal with. As childhood usually clouds our perceptions on things, it's a lot harder to deal with that childhood trauma that more than likely is the cause of these impulses within you. So what I would recommend is journaling. Step 1. Step 2, meditation, obviously. Step 3, different types of spiritual practices that bring up the trauma for you to deal with. And I don't have any particular exercises offhand, although if you do pranayama and you're awakening the kundalini, for example, that is, those types of exercises, types of yogic practices stuff can really help unblock that heart chakra and allow all that trauma to come up and surface. Also, pay attention to your dreams. Could be a lot of subtle information in your dreams. What else needs to be said about this? Like I said, I've encountered quite a few guys like this. I don't think I've encountered any females, but I have encountered several guys like this. Gay men, usually, which gives it an even worse stigma, given the recent developments in our social culture, especially in the United States of America. So again, this requires a very, very, very careful hand. And since a lot of the official reporters, a lot of the official therapists and such have mandatory reporting laws, if you need someone to help you through it, I would recommend some type of spiritualist. Or if they don't want to keep your secrets, the next best thing is, suffice to say, a priest. The only place you know for sure where confidentiality is not gonna fly out the window. But you really need to break down, if you're gonna deal with it, you need to break down the events and the behaviors and the environment that led you to being stuck in that point in time. What caused your mind to want to stay stagnant in when you were 16 or 15 or 14 or 5? What was it? How did that make you feel? How did that influence your mind? And then you can either work your way back or work your way forward, depending on how you do it, and really get a nuanced understanding of why. And like with psychopathy, you too, if you're going through a spiritual awakening and you have these issues, again, you're a forerunner. Society, a new society, a new earth is not going to manifest if we don't deal with the deepest, darkest aspects of ourselves. Okay? Now, I'm not saying everyone has tendencies in the PDF file direction, but we all, at a deeper level, can probably empathize with people like this, simply due to the fact that We're all human, and none of us are perfect, and there is truly, at the end of the day, no real right and wrong, good and evil. It's all experience. With that being said, our goal here is probably 9 times out of 10 to make the experience enjoyable and fruitful and growth filled. So if you're dealing with the attraction to minors, it is essential to give yourself some love. Give yourself, like I said, grace. But grace in this instance is just, it doesn't feel like the right word because it's not conveying the level of care to yourself that you need to give yourself. Because it's not fun dealing with these impulses, especially given how deep and bad society treats them. Like, you will get thrown in jail, or they will report you and you'll get put on some list even if you open up about a natural attraction that you have. And that's what I want to get to. It is a natural attraction, and by natural I mean it's a part of nature. It happens both in the animal kingdom and obviously within humans. There is a natural component to it, especially to the higher age brackets. For those attracted to that age bracket, there is a biological and evolutionary side to it. And like with psychopathy, it provides contrast, especially on the topic of free will. Now, I'm not going to get into a discussion of morality or natural law right now, because I have some unconventional beliefs on that. But this is specifically... But, excuse me, I lost my train of thought. Alright, getting back into it. If you're dealing with these impulses, again, remember that it's a natural byproduct of either nature or trauma. You're not an evil person. You're not non-spiritual. You're not unenlightened. You're not an NPC. You're not any of those negative connotations that are giving onto it. That's why I said you gotta give yourself self-love if you're dealing with this. You've got to. You've got to. Get yourself unstuck from the past. And that goes for all of us, for anything, but especially for this. You need to allow your mind and your heart to move on. And as you move on, the attractions get less and less and less. Because you're dealing with a trauma, and your mind is finally moving on. Moving closer to where you are now. It's meeting you where you're supposed to be. So, I guess with this, this all leads into the greater argument around perversion. Well, what is perversion? Well, perversion is anything that's not in alignment, but also it's anything that doesn't fit the norm. And the topics we talked about today certainly don't fit the norm, despite the fact that they are normal aspects in nature. They are normal aspects through spiritual awakening for a lot of people. And it's a real experience if you're dealing with it. Because like I said, it might not feel like it, but you are doing the world a great service by dealing with these taboo topics, by going within and extracting all of that darkness and integrating it into the greater whole. true unity. You're not ignoring it. You're not putting a judgment on it. You're not trying to suppress it. It just simply is. And from there, you can work and grow. PDF files, HEPA files, psychopathy, perversion, it's all, at the end of the day, for your greater good. It's for your greater enlightenment. Okay? Well, so it's about 56 minutes of rambling. I hope I made a salient point for somebody out there. If I didn't, I apologize. I will try to do better next time. If you're dealing with these issues, I wish you all the fucking support and love in the universe. You've got this. Go easy on yourself. If you feel the need to deal with these issues fully, if they're causing a problem, you got this. Just do some of the steps that I suggested. There's also a video by Teal Swan for the latter topic, the PDF files, from about, I believe it's about a decade ago, that can give you some more insight from a more healing point of view and a non-judgmental point of view. Okay? But I hope this video found everyone well. I hope you're doing well. I will try to be recording more and more over the next few days. And eventually I'm also going to start opening up some services for people that do have these darker impulses, so they can come and lay their burden down, open up about it, come clean about it, without the risk of judgment, without the risk of legal action, without the risk of social ostracization, without the stigmas. And hopefully that'll give some people, hopefully a lot of people, the closure they need in regards to either the psychopathy, PDF files, perversions, what have you. Okay. With that being said, please go easy on yourself if you're dealing with these. Please, please, love yourself. Please. You got this. You are a forerunner. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just a state of consciousness, and it's for your own greater good. I wish you all the best. I hope you all have a great night, afternoon, day, evening, space-time, wherever you are. I hope this finds you well, and I hope that you can finally get some peace and knowing that you're not alone in dealing with these issues, and that there are spaces that are non-judgmental, that want to see you do better, and that want to give you the benefit of the doubt without putting the weight of the world on your shoulders. Okay. This has been Michael with Arcturian Kundalini. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll see you guys around. Bye-bye.